Silk is one of the most remarkable materials nature has ever created, and one of the most underrated. Although it's most often associated with luxury, its existence is the result of complex biochemistry, precise evolutionary engineering, and processes that laboratories around the world are still trying to replicate. Silk is a natural animal fiber, produced mainly by the larvae of the mulberry silkworm, Bombyx mori, and certain species of spiders. Unlike plant-based fibers, like cotton or linen, silk is a protein, more specifically, a combination of two key proteins, fibroin and sericin. Fibroin forms the inner structural core of the thread. It's responsible for strength and elasticity. Sericin acts as a natural glue that binds the fibers together and keeps the cocoon intact. In the simplest terms, silk is a protein-based fiber produced by animals to build cocoons or webs. And for humans, it has become one of the most valued materials in history. Silk belongs to the small group of natural protein fibers produced by animals, and its exceptional physical properties come from the extraordinary architecture of its molecular building blocks. At the center of this structure is fibroin, a protein with a very specific amino acid composition. It is dominated by glycine, alanine, and serine, amino acids with very small side groups. This minimalist design allows them to arrange themselves into highly ordered beta sheet structures. This regular crystalline formation gives silk its strength, stability, and resistance to stretching qualities that have fascinated materials scientists for centuries. In nature, it's difficult to find another fiber whose microscopic components align with such precision, but fibroin is only the core. The entire fiber is surrounded by sericin, which acts as a natural binder. It's a sticky, protective layer that allows individual microfibers to form a compact cocoon. Sericin is responsible for the stiffness and moisture resistance of the cocoon, and it's also why the whole structure remains unified and stable. When sericin is removed during silk processing, it reveals the pure, smooth fibroin thread, which reflects light in a distinctive way. The reason silk is associated with sheen and luxury: silk has a multi-level structure, which means its properties arise not only from the proteins themselves, but also from the way those proteins are arranged. Within the fiber, crystalline regions dominated by beta sheets alternate with amorphous regions that are less ordered and more flexible. This complex composition makes silk strong and resilient while remaining lightweight. The fiber can withstand significant load, but can also absorb energy and gently return to its original shape, giving it resistance to dynamic deformation, something very hard to reproduce in synthetic materials. On the macro scale, a silk thread is the result of thousands of perfectly aligned molecules and microfibers working together. This hierarchical structure allows silk to both reflect light in a uniform way, creating its characteristic shine, and remain breathable, regulating moisture and temperature. Its protein-based nature allows the fiber to absorb a substantial amount of water without losing its performance. Qualities. The complexity of this structure is the reason modern science, despite enormous progress, still cannot perfectly recreate silk in a laboratory. The natural process that forms the fiber is so precise, and the proportions between its crystalline and amorphous regions so delicately balanced, that even the most advanced materials engineering methods can capture only part of its properties. Silk remains one of the few examples of a material in which nature has achieved a level of perfection technology is still trying to approach. Silk stands out thanks to a set of characteristics that together create an almost unbeatable material, each with a clear scientific explanation. Its sheen, smoothness, strength, and thermoregulation are the qualities most often mentioned. These four attributes are not accidental. They arise from the structure of the fiber and the ways light, heat, and mechanical forces interact with it. Silk's sheen is the result of light interacting with the perfectly ordered surface of the fiber. Its cross-section is smooth and resembles a rounded triangle, which causes light to reflect and refract in a regular way. Unlike cotton or linen, which have more porous and matte surfaces, silk reflects light selectively. This means it doesn't scatter light chaotically, but directs reflections in specific directions. On the molecular level, this is due to the parallel arrangement of fibroin fibers forming crystalline structures. These microstructures act like natural prisms that organize light. As a result, the shine of silk isn't just a simple reflection. It's an optical phenomenon created by the material's exceptional structural regularity. Silk's smoothness also stems from its protein-based construction. Fibroin arranged into orderly beta sheet structures creates an almost perfectly uniform surface on the microscopic level. With no protruding fibers, microbarbs, or irregularities, silk glides across the skin in a way plant fibers cannot. Sericin, present before processing, fills the spaces between microfibers and acts as a natural smoother. Once removed, fibroin reveals a clean, even structure that produces an effect unmatched by many synthetic materials. This is why silk is so gentle on the skin, doesn't cause friction, and is prized in products for people with allergies or sensitive complexions. Silk's strength is one of its most surprising features. Pound for pound, it can rival steel, a result of the extremely effective way the fiber combines crystalline and amorphous regions. The crystalline segments, made of tightly packed beta sheets, act like microscopic reinforcement bars. They restrict molecular movement and prevent the fiber from breaking. The amorphous regions act like elastic connectors, allowing the fiber to stretch, absorb energy, and return to its original shape. When silk is pulled, the stress distributes between both zones. The crystals stabilize the material, while the amorphous parts give it flexibility. It's a complex and remarkably efficient architecture that synthetic materials have yet to fully replicate. This is why silk combines resistance to tearing with a delicacy that belies its elegant appearance. Silk's thermoregulation is the result of both its chemistry and its spatial structure. The fiber naturally absorbs moisture, but in a controlled and even way. The protein nature of fibroin allows it to retain a significant percentage of its weight in water without feeling wet. This moisture doesn't accumulate in one spot but is dispersed along the fiber, stabilizing the skin's perceived temperature. In summer, silk wicks heat and moisture away, creating a cooling effect. In winter, it retains a thin layer of air near the skin, acting as micro-insulation. The fiber structure, in which stiff crystalline segments alternate with flexible ones, forms a kind of natural microscreen that regulates airflow. Silk doesn't behave like a typical insulating or cooling material. Instead, it actively stabilizes body temperature. Adapting to its environment, the combination of sheen, smoothness, remarkable strength, and temperature regulation makes silk a material that's extremely difficult to replace. Each of these qualities comes from the precise, hierarchical structure of the fiber, a structure that nature has perfected to an extraordinary degree. And that is why, despite decades of research and countless attempts to create a synthetic equivalent, silk remains one of the most advanced natural materials we know. Silk begins with silkworms, which for thousands of years have been among the most important micro-producers in human history. These insects are specialized for a single task, transforming the energy of food into protein that will later be used to build a protective structure. But before that happens, their lives pass through a series of stages, each biologically pre-programmed and essential for the eventual formation of the fiber. The mulberry silkworm, Bombyx mori, is a species domesticated so long ago that it is now almost never found in the wild. Its entire life cycle has been shaped to allow it to grow quickly, eat intensively, and reach the proper size in time for metamorphosis. Everything begins with the egg, extremely small yet containing the full blueprint of development. The female lays hundreds of them, and each can survive a long dormant period until conditions are favorable for a new larva to begin its life. When the caterpillar hatches, the most intense stage of its existence begins. The silkworm larva is a highly specialized eating machine. It feeds almost exclusively on mulberry leaves, which is crucial for its metabolism because these leaves supply the material needed for the later production of the proteins that build its body and all the structures it creates. Over the course of several weeks, the larva undergoes successive molts. Its body increases in size many times over, and each growth stage ends with the shedding of its exoskeleton, which cannot keep up with its rapid development. It is during the larval stage that the silkworm accumulates vast amounts of nutrients. Its digestive system, glands, and entire physiology are geared toward rapidly converting food into energy and proteins needed for the next phase of its life. As the larva matures, its behavior changes. It becomes less mobile, stops feeding, and begins preparing to enter the pupal stage. This moment is a turning point, the stage of continuous growth ends, and the process of reorganizing the entire organism begins. A silkworm that has passed through all larval stages is ready for transformation. Its metabolism shifts from consuming and storing energy to processes associated with metamorphosis. Everything that happened earlier, rapid growth, intense feeding, accumulation of proteins and fats, served one purpose: to create an organism prepared for the most important task in its biological cycle. At this point, the silkworm ceases to be a larva and begins one of the most fascinating transformations in the insect world. When the silkworm larva reaches full maturity and its body is ready for change, a process begins that has fascinated humans for centuries: the construction of the cocoon. This is the moment when all the energy gathered by the insect, all the proteins produced in its body, and the entire biological mechanism nature prepared it for over weeks of intense growth, are directed toward a single task: creating one continuous fiber. The larva stops eating, becomes noticeably calmer, and begins making head movements that resemble a steady, precise dance. These are not random motions. The silkworm performs them with almost mathematical regularity, laying the fiber layer by layer. The fiber is secreted by two silk glands but merges into a single strand, making the cocoon a compact, cohesive structure. And that single strand is the key. This uninterrupted fiber can reach lengths of several hundred meters. In exceptional cases, it exceeds half a kilometer, making it one of the longest continuous natural fibers known to humanity. The process of constructing the cocoon usually lasts several days. The silkworm surrounds itself from the outside inward, creating an initial delicate shell and then increasingly dense layers. As the cocoon grows, the outer fiber hardens, stabilizes, and gains its characteristic strength. Sericin, the natural glue secreted along with the fiber, binds the layers together, making the cocoon stiff, moisture-resistant, and capable of protecting the developing pupa from the outside world. Meanwhile, the fiber inside remains continuous, flexible, and laid in elliptical loops, giving the cocoon its characteristic shape. The fact that the cocoon is made from a single thread is crucial for later processing. Its length and continuity are what distinguish silk from most other natural materials. Plant fibers form as short fragments that must be twisted and joined, while silk yields an exceptionally long, uniform thread that can be unwound almost without interruption. The cocoon is not a random structure, but a precise biological construction in which every layer and every movement of the larva affects the later quality of the fiber. When the cocoon is complete, the silkworm inside begins its transformation. For the insect, the cocoon is a shelter. For humans, it is a raw material with properties rarely found elsewhere in nature. When the cocoon is finished and the larva inside has entered the pupal stage, the next phase begins for humans, extracting the fiber. At this moment, the remarkable structure created by the silkworm must be turned into a material suitable for further processing. This process includes reeling, the unwinding of the fibers, and spinning, which produces what is known as raw silk filaments, long strands ready for the next stages of work. First, the cocoon must be prepared for unwinding. A raw cocoon is firmly bound together by sericin, the natural protein adhesive that cements all layers of the fiber. To unwind the thread, the outer layers must be loosened. In traditional methods, this is done by heating the cocoons in water, which softens the sericin and makes the structure more pliable. The goal is not to dissolve the sericin entirely, but to ensure the fiber is no longer rigidly glued and can be gently caught. When the cocoon is sufficiently softened, the beginning of the thread is located, always the most delicate moment of the entire process. Silk filament is extremely thin, nearly invisible, and finding its end requires precision and skill. Once the starting point is found, the reeling can begin. And here the uniqueness of silk reveals itself. The entire structure can be unwound smoothly, meter by meter, until the full length of the single strand is obtained. Sometimes this is hundreds of meters of continuous, uninterrupted material that still retains its integrity. However, a single filament from one cocoon is too thin to be used on its own. Only by combining several fibers into one do we get what is known as raw silk, strong but still delicately textured yarn. During reeling, fibers from multiple cocoons are therefore drawn together in parallel. When the threads flow evenly, they are joined to form a material of optimal thickness. The process is rhythmically calm, almost hypnotic: steady tension, consistent speed, and an awareness that from an insect's raw construction emerges the fiber that will later become fabric with extraordinary properties. During the combining of fibers, the sericin that still partially coats them acts as a natural binder. It allows the fibers from different cocoons to merge into a single yarn. This is why raw silk is already uniform and stable at the very beginning of its human journey. Only in later processing steps, when the silk enters the deguming bath, is the sericin removed to reveal pure fibroin. Through reeling and spinning, raw silk is obtained, a material that for centuries formed the foundation of trade routes, the wealth of empires, and the basis of one of the most important crafts in textile history. At this stage, silk is fully separated from the cocoon, but still carries within it the precision of both the biological and human effort that brought it into this form. When the raw silk filament has been unwound from the cocoons and combined into a uniform yarn, the next stage of its transformation begins. This is the moment when the natural fiber, still full of sericin and lacking its final softness, must be prepared for weaving. The process is complex and multi-stage, but each part has a precise purpose: to make the silk clean, flexible, lustrous, and ready to absorb dye and undergo further treatment. The first step is deguming, the removal of sericin. This protein played an important role in the cocoon, binding the fibers and protecting the pupa. But in silk intended for fabric, it must be eliminated. Sericin gives the fiber stiffness and a matte appearance, whereas textile silk requires softness and its characteristic shine. During deguming, the silk filament enters a bath, in which the sericin gradually loosens and then separates from the fibers. This is the moment when the yarn begins to transform almost visibly. It becomes lighter, softer, more fluid, and its touch acquires the characteristic smoothness. Once the sericin is removed, the silk must be prepared again for further processing. The fibers, which become exceptionally soft after deguming, need to be stabilized and reshaped. The yarn is therefore dried under controlled conditions, combed, and arranged into regular strands. At this stage, the fiber begins to resemble what we now associate with raw silk. It is light, naturally lustrous, and finally reveals the full range of its physical properties. Next, the silk enters the winding process, whose purpose is to organize the yarn in a way that allows it to be woven later. The fibers are arranged on spools, bobbins, and edge-wrapped skeins. Each form of winding has its purpose and depends on the technique of weaving chosen later. This is crucial because silk requires exceptionally even tension, and any irregularity will be visible in the finished fabric. This is why attention to detail is so meticulous at this stage. The uniform handling of the fibers determines not only the aesthetic outcome, but also the durability of the entire textile. The next stage is twisting the yarn. A natural silk filament is already strong and long, but only the proper twist gives it the mechanical resistance and character that define the future fabric. The twist may be light to preserve softness and delicacy, or stronger to create a denser, more compact structure. Depending on how the yarn is prepared, silk can become the foundation of airy, almost mist-like fabrics, or heavy, substantial, even sculptural materials. Only after the yarn has been twisted and stabilized is it ready for weaving. This is where, on the loom, the yarn becomes fabric. The weft and warp interlace with mathematical precision, and the properties once rooted in biology begin to work in harmony with human craftsmanship. Each fiber, tensioned and guided through the teeth of the loom, builds the structure of the material, sometimes light as a spiderweb, sometimes dense like an ornate shell. Thanks to the exceptional strength of silk threads, one can create fabrics as thin as air as well as those smooth and heavy, like satin or jacquard. At the end, when the fabric leaves the loom, it undergoes one more stage, finishing. The silk is washed, dried, and sometimes subjected to additional softening or stabilizing treatments. Depending on its future use, it may also be dyed. Its protein-based nature allows dyes to penetrate deeply, producing colors that are vivid, saturated, and multi-dimensional. Ultimately, silk acquires its unique quality, the blend of durability and lightness that seems contradictory yet coexists effortlessly in this material. At this point, the technical journey of the fiber ends, and its story in human hands begins, in the hands of artisans, designers, and wearers. But before silk reaches someone's wardrobe or living space, it must undergo this entire sequence of transformations from cocoon, through reeling, deguming, twisting, and weaving, until it attains its final form. It is a long process, but it is precisely this process that gives silk a character that cannot be imitated. There are many varieties of silk, and each carries its own trace of the nature, environment, and species of silkworm that produces it. These differences shape the fiber's character, its shine, its texture, even its natural color. The most famous, almost legendary, is the silk made by the mulberry silkworm, but alongside it exist wild varieties, less predictable, more rugged and captivating in an entirely different way. Every type of silk is its own story, its own ecosystem, its own logic of beauty. The most classic and purest form is mulberry silk. It is the foundation upon which the global silk tradition was built, with a history stretching back thousands of years. It is produced exclusively by the Bombyx mori silkworm, a species domesticated so long ago that it no longer exists in the wild. This silkworm feeds solely on mulberry leaves, giving its fiber exceptional uniformity, consistent in color, thickness, and structure. That is why mulberry silk is the softest, smoothest, and most lustrous type of silk. Its fibers are thin, sleek, and almost mathematically regular. Most luxury brands rely on it because it creates impeccably refined fabrics with a signature hand feel that cannot be mistaken for anything else. But beside this cultivated variety lies the world of wild silk, untamed, textured, and full of natural surprises. The best-known example is Tassar silk. It is produced by silkworms living in natural forests and feeding on the leaves of various trees, rather than a single, carefully controlled species. As a result, Tassar fibers lack perfect uniformity. They are thicker, stronger, more matte, and often naturally shaded with tones of gold, copper, or soft brown. This silk carries the unmistakable imprint of its wild origins. To the touch, it is less slippery than mulberry, but more raw, more organic, as if it holds within it the texture of the landscape it comes from. Tassar fabrics are remarkably durable and perform beautifully in more structured designs. In South Asian cultures, this strength has been valued for centuries. Another remarkable wild silk is muga, extremely rare and found almost exclusively in India. Its fibers possess a natural golden glow that cannot be replicated with dye. Muga silk is exceptionally strong, nearly indestructible in everyday use, and its luster does not fade over time. Instead, it deepens. It is an almost mythical material, traditionally reserved for ceremonial garments and textiles considered to be heirloom pieces. There is also eri silk, sometimes called peace silk, because it is typically harvested without killing the silkworm. The eri cocoon cannot be reeled into one continuous filament, so it must be processed differently. Eri has a matte appearance, shorter fibers, and a soft, warm feel closer to a fine wool than to classic silk. In many parts of the world, it is prized precisely for these qualities, for its comfort, its gentle warmth, and its calm, understated look. The oldest stories say it all began by accident. Empress Lizu, sitting in a garden beneath a mulberry tree, noticed a cocoon that had fallen into her cup of hot tea. The water softened the Saracen, and when she tried to pull the intruder from her drink, the cocoon stretched, revealing a single, impossibly long thread. The legend is beautiful and full of symbolism. And while it may not have happened exactly that way, it captures something essential. Silk truly was born in China, discovered through a mix of curiosity, observation, and attention to the quiet rhythms of nature. In reality, its origins likely reach back several thousand years before our era. The Chinese had already domesticated the mulberry silkworm and were experimenting with cocoons. They tore them apart, soaked them, boiled them, watching how the fibers behaved. They must have noticed that when a cocoon is wet, the Saracen softens and the filament can be unwound. That was the breakthrough moment. The instant humanity realized that the delicate structure built by an insect could become a material that could be controlled, spun, woven, and transformed into something far beyond a simple protective shell. Understanding was only the beginning. True mastery took time. The first weaving workshops emerged, the first methods of selecting cocoons, the first spinning techniques that preserved the extraordinary length of the filament. Generation after generation, The knowledge grew more refined until silk became something precious, guarded, imperial. For centuries, the secret of its production was fiercely protected by Chinese dynasties, treated like a national treasure. Smuggling silkworms beyond the borders carried severe punishment not as a myth, but as a very real attempt to maintain economic dominance. But even the most tightly held secret eventually travels. Merchants, envoys, and wandering traders carried silk westward, and it was desired instantly. It was light, luminous, cool to the touch, and almost unreal in its delicacy. When the first bolts of silk arrived in Persia, India, and the Roman Empire, they caused a sensation. Silk quickly became a luxury reserved for the elite, valued on par with gold. Moving along caravan routes, it transformed from material into a status symbol and a tool of diplomacy and commerce between civilizations. From this movement, this exchange not just of goods but of ideas, cultures, and languages, the Silk Road was born. It was not a single road, but a network of pathways that stitched together nearly the entire known ancient world. It connected China with Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. Caravan after caravan carried silk across deserts, steppes, mountains, and oases, and with it traveled spices, gold, glass, paper, religious beliefs, astronomical knowledge, and technologies. Silk was one of the pillars of this vast system of exchange, so integral that the route took its name from it. For more than 1,000 years, it shaped the economies and politics of entire regions. Silk belts, banners, robes, and fabrics became symbols of prestige and instruments of diplomacy. The Silk Road was the pulsing artery of the ancient world, and silk was its brightest, most coveted lifeblood. Over time, the secret of production spread to Korea, Japan, and later, thanks to daring monks and merchants, to India and Byzantium. But even as more cultures learned to create their own silk, the fiber still carried the echo of its oldest home. Every thread, every fabric was a reminder of the moment when humanity learned to use an insect's biology to create a material entwined with wealth, spirituality, and power. This is how silk was born, not as a simple fabric, but as a story. And for centuries, it remained one of the few materials that shaped culture, economy, and imagination all at once. Silk is a material that, at first glance, seems fragile, almost ephemeral, as if one careless movement could damage it. That impression is an illusion. In truth, its physical properties are surprising, even paradoxical. The deeper you look into its structure, the clearer it becomes that this delicacy is only a facade. Beneath it lies remarkable natural engineering. Subtle but profoundly effective, elasticity is the first of these hidden qualities. A silk fiber, though as thin as a spider's thread, can stretch to a significant portion of its length before it begins to break or lose shape. This comes from the fiber's protein composition. Fibroin, the core of silk, is made of microscopic crystalline structures linked by flexible amorphous segments. It's like an intricate web in which some elements are rigid while others can extend. Because of this, silk accommodates the movement of the body, adapts to its rhythm, and still preserves its form. That's where the sensation of silk flowing over the skin comes from, yielding, but never losing elegance. Strength is the next surprise. Although it may be hard to believe, silk is one of the strongest natural materials in the world. Pound for pound, it rivals the strength of steel wire. Nature designed it as armor for the pupa. The cocoon had to withstand rain, wind, temperature shifts, and even small predators. Fibroin forms crystalline structures that give the fiber extraordinary resistance to breaking. Humanity took full advantage of this. Silk threads appeared in historical armor, harnesses, musical instruments, and even early surgical sutures, where strength combined with softness was invaluable. The third key property, breathability, feels intuitive when you hold silk fabric, but it is grounded in science. Silk fibers have microscopic spaces between fibroin crystals, tiny channels that allow air to circulate. Silk also manages moisture exceptionally well. It is hygroscopic, able to absorb more than a fifth of its weight in water without feeling damp. This allows the fabric to regulate temperature, cooling when it's hot and insulating when the air grows colder. That is why silk has been worn for centuries in both tropical climates and cooler regions. Few synthetic materials match its ability to maintain thermal balance. All these qualities, elasticity, strength, breathability combined to form a material that seems almost impossible. Silk unites contradictions, delicate yet strong, weightless yet protective, flexible yet resistant to distortion. It feels as though nature created it purely to shelter a tiny insect, and by accident produced a fiber that has captivated humanity for millennia. That is why silk never becomes outdated. Technologically or aesthetically, its properties still inspire awe for what a small, unassuming creature can create. Although most people associate silk primarily with luxurious fabrics, its history and potential reach far beyond the world of fashion. It is a material that nature designed for protection and one that humans, over time, learned to harness for some of the most demanding fields, including medicine. Few natural fibers have undergone such a remarkable transformation, from insect cocoons to operating rooms and biomaterials laboratories. And all of this was made possible thanks to its protein structure, purity, exceptional strength, and above all, biocompatibility. One of the earliest non-textile uses of silk was in surgery. As early as ancient India and China, silk threads were used for stitching wounds. Centuries later, as Western medicine advanced, silk earned a place as one of the essential suture materials. Physicians were fascinated by the same qualities that captivate biotechnologists today. Silk fibers are smooth, extremely strong, and resistant to excessive stretching, allowing wounds to heal evenly. At the same time, being a natural material, silk is surprisingly well tolerated by the human body, avoiding many of the inflammatory reactions triggered by other early sutures, such as those made from animal gut. In the 20th century, silk sutures became standard in reconstructive, ophthalmic, and vascular surgery. They are still used in many procedures today, even though they now compete with synthetic options. Yet even the most advanced polymers have not managed to fully displace silk, because there are still situations where silk offers the optimal balance of strength, flexibility, and gentleness toward human tissue. The rise of molecular biology and materials engineering opened an entirely new chapter for silk. Researchers discovered that fibrin, the primary protein in silk, can be dissolved, reshaped, and modified in ways unimaginable in the era when silk was used solely for stitching wounds. Scientists began dissolving fibrin and forming it into films, gels, microscale meshes, and sponges. They found that in these forms, silk retains its essential traits: durability, purity, and most importantly, compatibility with human cells. This is how silk biomaterials emerged. Today they are used in tissue reconstruction, as scaffolds in tissue engineering. Thanks to its structural properties, fibrin can serve as a substrate on which cells migrate, proliferate, and differentiate. It forms a kind of biological scaffolding, as if nature had always designed it for rebuilding living tissues. Silk-based implants are now used in regenerating bone, cartilage, skin, and even peripheral nerves. Silk also proves to be an excellent material for controlled drug delivery. Its structure allows biologically active molecules, proteins, peptides, pharmaceuticals, to be embedded within it, then released slowly and steadily over long periods. Silk microcapsules are used in modern drug delivery systems, in cancer therapy, in treatments of chronic infections, and even in dermatological systems that release active substances onto the skin without irritation. In recent years, silk has also entered the realm of advanced technologies. Transparent, flexible films for biomedical electronics are being produced from it. From a material once used to stitch wounds, scientists now create biodegradable sensors that monitor organ function, implants that safely dissolve after completing their work, and intelligent dressings that respond to changes in a healing wound. All of this reveals the extraordinary nature of silk, not only beautiful and luxurious, but also functional, sophisticated, and strikingly modern. Nature created a nearly perfect fiber, and humans learned to use it in ways that a silkworm could never have imagined. A material that for thousands of years embodied wealth is now becoming a symbol of innovation, a biomaterial of the future, evolving at the intersection of science, medicine, technology, and biology. From the moment humans discovered the power of the silk fiber, they dreamed of one thing: recreating it without the help of silkworms. Not out of disrespect for nature, but out of fascination with its precision. Silk was too perfect not to attempt to replicate. Too light, too strong, too elastic to remain solely the product of an insect's craft. And so, for more than a century, scientists have returned to a single question. Can we create artificial silk that matches or surpasses the natural one? The earliest attempts were chaotic and full of naive optimism. In the 19th century, researchers experimented with cellulose, acetate, nitrocellulose. Every new substance was hailed as the new silk, though what it truly shared with silk was mostly its sheen. This led to the birth of viscose, then nylon and other synthetics that merely imitated silk's smoothness and lightness, but lacked its strength, structure, and biological function. Only with the rise of molecular biology did the question of artificial silk become serious and scientifically precise. The real breakthrough came when scientists understood that creating synthetic silk would require more than finding a similar raw material. The fibroin itself, the protein at the heart of the silk fiber, had to be recreated. This protein is no arbitrary structure. Its chains fold into crystalline beta segments responsible for strength and amorphous regions that give the fiber elasticity. That architecture had to be copied at the molecular level. And so science stepped into territory no silkworm could have foreseen. Researchers began inserting fibroin-producing genes into bacteria and yeast. Microorganisms that in nature have nothing to do with silk suddenly began producing its components. This became one of the first forms of biofabrication, the idea that a material can be grown like bread yeast. Except the end result is a protein of extraordinary properties. The challenge, however, was that silkworm fibroin is a massive, unwieldy protein, extremely difficult to express stably. So the first successes came instead from spider silk, even stronger, even more elastic, with characteristics bordering on science fiction. Spiders cannot be farmed on an industrial scale, but their silk can be replicated in laboratories, thanks to genetic engineering. This led to the first synthetic spider silk fibers produced by modified bacteria, yeast, and even, experimentally, by sheep and goats engineered to secrete silk protein in their milk. At the same time, another line of research has been developing: regenerated silk, made by dissolving natural fibroin and reforming it into fibers. Here scientists are trying to mimic the spinning process that silkworms control so precisely with humidity, tension, and pH. In a lab, each of these variables must be set manually, almost millimeter by millimeter. Early successes are already emerging. Fibers that, though not identical, come increasingly close to natural silk. Today, research on artificial silk is one of the most dynamic fields in biomaterials science. Laboratories are creating fibers 5 times stronger than steel, as elastic as rubber, biodegradable like natural silk, and producible without cocoons, insects, or biological limits. Biotechnology companies are already manufacturing experimental batches that could transform the textile, orthopedic, and even electronic industries. Scientists are no longer trying to imitate silk. They are trying to enhance it. They create hybrids in which fibroin is combined with graphene, metal nanoparticles, or functional peptides. This leads to fibers that conduct electricity, fibers that change color with temperature, fibers with shape memory. The irony is that silk, one of humanity's oldest materials, is becoming the foundation of some of the most futuristic technologies of the 21st century. And it all began with a tiny cocoon and the curiosity of someone who decided to see what would happen if they dropped it into hot water. Asterisk. The world's largest modern silk-producing regions feel like a natural extension of ancient traditions, as if history itself were making sure silk never strays too far from its roots. That's why the heart of production still lies in Asia, above all in China, which for several thousand years has remained the world's greatest producer and guardian of sericulture. There, hundreds of millions of cocoons are transformed into thread each year, and the skill of judging fiber quality is passed down from generation to generation, often in the same regions once crossed by the Silk Road. India, too, treats silk with almost ritual reverence. It is the world's second largest producer and the only country on Earth that manufactures every variety of natural silk. Beyond India, the map extends to Uzbekistan, Thailand, Vietnam, and Japan, where silk is not just a material but a cultural treasure, a symbol of craftsmanship and precision. And although the geography of production has remained fairly constant, the process of evaluating silk quality is universal, independent of latitude or climate. Every true silk expert begins with touch, the moment when the fabric almost tells its own story. High-grade silk feels cool at first, but warms instantly under the palm, as if it were waking up. It glides smoothly across the skin but never feels slippery. Its softness is nothing like the artificial smoothness of polyester. It comes from the microstructure of fibroin, tiny irregularities that give silk its unmistakable delicacy. Next comes the luster. Good silk doesn't shine like plastic. Its glow is pearly, deep, alive, a soft play of light created by the triangular shape of the fiber. The sheen feels organic, shifting subtly with the angle of view, like sunlight flickering across water. Synthetic imitations can't replicate this. They shine in a flat, one-dimensional, monotonous way. Another key criterion is the uniformity of the filament. The finest silk consists of continuous, long, regular fibers harvested from cocoons with minimal breaks. In practice, this means the fabric drapes evenly, without random ripples or tiny bumps where the thickness changes. In premium raw silk, a single filament can stretch for hundreds of meters, and the better its continuity, the higher the silk's value. There's also an auditory test, used by jewelers and luxury fabric makers. When you rub silk against silk, it should produce a delicate, dry, faintly squeaky sound, the famous silk whisper. It's the acoustic signature of fiber-on-fiber friction, something synthetics cannot reproduce no matter how advanced they are. And finally, there are the qualities invisible at first glance: scent and flame behavior. When burned, natural silk smells like singed hair and leaves behind a fragile black ash, not a hard plastic bead. It's not a test the average wearer performs, but it's essential for manufacturers and textile conservators. Together, these elements create the profile of a silk worthy of the highest standards. And even as technology races forward and synthetics become increasingly refined, natural silk remains a material whose authenticity can be recognized even with your eyes closed. That's why the regions that have produced it for centuries continue to guard it, because silk, more than any other material, depends on tradition. Every silk fabric is like a different story spun from the same thread. The same material, the same fibroin, yet once woven in a new way, it takes on a completely different personality. Silk can be heavy or ethereal, smooth as glass or textured with a refined, deliberate irregularity. What emerges in the hands of weavers depends on the weave, the twist of the yarn, the precision with which each filament is laid. That's why silk textiles form an entire family of materials, each playing its own distinct role in fashion. The most famous is silk satin, a fabric with an almost hypnotic glow, smooth as a mirror, filled with soft light. Its even, luminous surface comes from the satin weave, where the weft threads skip over several warped threads to reflect light in wide, uninterrupted streaks. Satin doesn't impose its weight. It drapes, flows, and forms soft waves with every movement. Evening gowns and lingerie are made from it, not simply because it's luxurious, but because nothing else behaves quite like it. At the opposite end of the spectrum is chiffon, light, as if woven from air. It is the silk closest to mist, semi-transparent, nearly weightless, whisper-soft. Its weave is so open that light passes through almost freely, yet this fragility is an illusion. Chiffon is surprisingly strong, even though it seems as if a strong breath could dissolve it. It's used wherever a fabric needs to add movement and lightness, in dresses, veils, and layered constructions. Then there is crepe, a fabric known for its fine, subtly uneven texture created by twisting the yarn to the limits of its elasticity. When such threads are woven together, the material gains a delicate crinkle, a hidden ripple that comes not from sewing but from the nature of the yarn itself. Crepe has a quiet dignity and discipline. It is matte, springy, and resistant to wrinkles. It does not flow like satin. It holds shape, draping with a more architectural character, which is why it's ideal for blouses, day dresses, and refined suits. And then comes organza, silk that is stiff, almost sculptural. It is transparent like chiffon but firmer, more geometric. Made from tightly twisted fine yarns, it has a structure reminiscent of delicate paper or textile glass. Organza isn't meant to flow. It's meant to build. That's why it forms ruffles, voluminous sleeves, ball skirts, and elements designed to hover around the silhouette rather than fall against it. It allows designers to create shapes impossible with any other fabric. Each of these silks comes from the same source, yet through human craftsmanship and the precision of the weave, it transforms into something entirely different. That is the magic of silk. From a single filament, you can weave not just a fabric, but an entire spectrum of characters. Satin seduces with light, chiffon floats with airiness, crepe delights with texture, and organza shapes space, and each one remains silk in its purest form. Asterisk, although silk is associated with nature, lightness, and purity, its production has a far more complex environmental impact than one might assume at first glance. A look behind the scenes of silkworm cultivation reveals that each cocoon is the result of intense effort, not only by the insect, but also by the humans who must create strictly controlled conditions for it. Silk is born in symbiosis with nature, yet it also places a burden on it, subtle, but undeniable. At the heart of silk production is the mulberry tree, a plant with an enormous appetite for water and sunlight. Mulberry plantations occupy vast areas, and maintaining them requires irrigation, proper climate, and meticulous care. In regions where monocultures dominate natural ecosystems, this ultimately leads to soil depletion and reduced biodiversity. And although mulberries require fewer chemicals than some other industrial crops, large-scale cultivation still relies on fertilizers and protective agents that affect local soil and groundwater. Silk also means insect farming on a massive scale. The domesticated silkworm is fully dependent on humans and no longer exists in the wild. We have created conditions so comfortable that the species has lost the ability to survive outside cultivation. This results in a closed, intensive system that consumes energy to heat facilities, control humidity, and keep conditions perfectly stable for the insect's development. In hot climates, the energy use is lower, but in cooler regions, sericulture carries a noticeable carbon footprint. Another factor is the fiber extraction process itself. In traditional production, cocoons are boiled in hot water to dissolve sericin and allow the filament to unwind in one continuous strand. This requires significant amounts of energy and water, and it results in the death of the larvae, raising not only ethical questions but also ecological ones. As organic waste must be processed or disposed of, then comes the dyeing stage. Although many modern dye houses increasingly use natural dyes and water-saving systems, in many parts of the world chemical dyes are still widely used, and wastewater often flows directly into local rivers, especially where proper treatment facilities are lacking. Silk itself is biodegradable. It breaks down naturally without harming the environment, but before it reaches the wearer, it frequently undergoes processes far from environmentally ideal. At the same time, compared with many other fibers, especially synthetics, silk has the potential to be an environmentally friendly material. It requires no petroleum, releases no microplastics, and its low level of processing means it is less energy intensive than synthetic fibers or even industrial cotton. The issue lies not in silk as a material, but in the scale and intensity of its production. As a result, silk exists in a complicated space between tradition and sustainability. On one hand, it is natural, renewable, and biodegradable. On the other, its large-scale production brings real environmental burdens. That's why more and more voices call for rethinking current methods, seeking alternatives, and developing technologies that will allow silk to remain a luxury, not only for the skin, but also for the planet. Asterisk, although silk has long been regarded as a symbol of luxury and natural elegance, the shine that defines it casts shadows filled with questions that increasingly return to public debate. These questions are not only environmental, they are fundamentally ethical. Because for this delicate, luminous material to exist in its purest form, a process must occur that many people find morally difficult to accept. In traditional silk production, silkworm larvae die inside their cocoons. This is not the result of cruelty, but of technological necessity. Silk has its highest value when the filament remains intact, continuous, and uniform. If the insect completes its life cycle, it chews its way out as a moth, and the thread that could stretch for hundreds of meters breaks into short fragments, losing its precious structure. For this reason, the cocoons are processed in hot water before metamorphosis is complete. A step once seen as an unquestioned tradition has now become one of the central flashpoints in discussions about the ethics of silk. For some, this is simply a natural part of the production chain, comparable to raising livestock. For others, it is unacceptable suffering inflicted on living beings, especially given that silkworms have been stripped of the ability to survive in the wild and exist entirely for human needs. The fact that the domesticated mulberry silkworm can no longer function outside controlled conditions raises questions about the limits of human interference in nature and our responsibility toward species that evolved solely for material production. Out of these controversies emerged an alternative, so-called peace silk or ahimsa silk, in which the moth is allowed to emerge before the cocoon is processed. This method preserves the life of the insect, but it comes with consequences. The fibers are shorter, and the resulting silk has a different structure and feel. It is more matte, less uniform, and typically more expensive, as it requires more raw material and more time-consuming processing. For some consumers, it is a compromise worth embracing. Others see it as a marketing gesture that does not solve the fundamental issue, but merely shifts the ethical burden onto the quality of the textile. Social concerns layer onto this further. In some regions, sericulture remains one of the primary sources of income for local communities, especially women who work in mulberry cultivation and cocoon reeling. Poor working conditions, low wages, and lack of regulation are still widespread in many parts of Asia, raising the question of whether a luxury material should exist at the expense of human well-being and dignity. Silk is often marketed as a prestigious product, yet its production chain does not always reflect the luxury seen by the final customer. Today's market demands transparency. Consumers increasingly want to know where their silk comes from, what conditions existed in the farms and dye houses, and whether local communities were treated fairly. At the same time, pressure is mounting to develop alternative methods: ethical silk, regenerated silk, and biotechnologically produced fibers made without the involvement of animals. Ethical controversies do not disqualify silk as a material. Rather, they compel us to view it not merely as a luxury product, but as the result of a complex, multi-layered relationship between humans and nature. Silk is beautiful, but its beauty does not have to depend on silence. More and more it becomes a catalyst for conversations about how to create luxury responsibly, and whether the future of silk can be as noble as its shine. As ecological and ethical awareness continues to grow, silk is no longer seen as the only option for those who desire a luxurious, natural material. Alternatives are emerging, some closely related to traditional silk, others entirely new, born from technological creativity and the shifting values of modern consumers. It is a world where luxury no longer requires ethical compromise, and beauty no longer has to be born from suffering. The most well-known alternative is the family of peace silks, where the life of the silkworm is not interrupted. The insects are allowed to emerge from their cocoons, and the fibers are harvested only after their natural transformation. Among these are India's ahimsa silk, airy silk, as well as various local varieties created by small, eco-friendly farms. These materials are more matte, less uniform, and their structure resembles naturally loosened fiber. Yet it is precisely in this imperfection that many people find authenticity and moral comfort. Peace silk is not a substitute for traditional silk. It is a conscious choice that places values above perfection. Alongside it, regenerated silk is gaining traction. Fibers produced through the recycling of existing silk textiles. Worn scarves, production leftovers, cutting scraps, all of this can re-enter circulation once carefully cleaned, dissolved, and respun into yarn. Though regenerated fibroin rarely achieves the ideal structure of a continuous filament, it gains a second life as subtle, rustic fabrics with a soft, gently irregular texture. It is a material that carries traces of previous stories, an artifact of past luxury transformed into new value. Beyond these ethical versions of natural silk, plant-based fibers are emerging, often called vegan silks. Although they are not silk in a chemical or structural sense, their appearance and drape make them compelling alternatives. The best known include cupro, made from cotton waste, modal and lyocell, derived from wood cellulose, as well as innovative materials such as Pinatex from pineapple leaves or rami, a plant prized for its exceptional smoothness and sheen. What they all share is that they require no animal farming, and with responsible production, they can be far less burdensome for the environment. Recycling of proteins is also becoming increasingly important. It involves recovering fibroin from silk waste and blending it with other natural fibers such as wool, cotton, or linen. This creates hybrid textiles that preserve some qualities of silk softness, luster, breathability while being more durable and economical. One of the most intriguing properties of silk is its hypoallergenic nature. Natural fibrin has a structure that does not encourage the accumulation of dust mites or bacteria, and the surface of the fiber is so smooth that allergens struggle to cling to it. For this reason, silk has long been regarded as a clean material, ideal for sensitive skin. In times when the concept of allergies did not yet exist, silk was intuitively chosen for infants, the ill, and those with skin problems. And today we know this was no coincidence. Even more fascinating is spider silk, whose strength is unrivaled. The strongest types of spider threads, such as dragline silk, surpass steel of the same diameter, while remaining elastic, lightweight, and capable of absorbing enormous amounts of energy without breaking. This is why a spiderweb can stop an insect flying at a speed that would otherwise reduce it to dust. For centuries, people attempted to use spider silk for textiles, with poor results, as spiders do not tolerate living in groups. Only biotechnology has opened the door to large-scale production of these exceptional fibers. Despite all its scientific complexity, silk has never lost one thing: its reputation as an exceptional fabric. In culture, fashion, and art, it has, for centuries, served as the purest synonym of luxury. It takes only a touch of silk to feel that incomparable smoothness and lightness that make one instinctively aware of encountering something extraordinary. It is a form of luxury that arises not merely from its price, but from the entire journey the fiber must take, from a tiny silkworm egg to a shimmering fabric that drapes over the skin like light.